Good evening. This is the Special Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment Committee meeting of the Board of Education. Tonight, we're going to hear from members of the faculty and administration updating the board on the evolving plans for the mastery requirement that the state has passed and requiring that we run a 1 credit for graduating seniors. And so with further ado, I don't know whether Paul's going to start or Julia's going to start or Aneen's going to start.
I will defer to Aneen.
Okay, Aneen.
And I am going to introduce the principal of the high school and the faculty with her, Tammy Lazat and Joel Rabin, and they are going to talk about where we currently stand with our thinking and planning and what are evolving thoughts for what's going to happen going forward. So Julia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and I appreciate this opportunity to come before all of you tonight and help to clarify some of the thinking that has gone into and continues to go into the mastery-based diploma assessment graduation requirements. And I also want to express gratitude to many community members as well as our students who have been giving us ongoing and real-time feedback into the design of what is currently structured as a course in a student schedule. From this process, I think that we are on our way to creating a really rich and reflective, self-evaluative process for the students to go through to the benefit of what comes with life after high school. So I'd like to approach a couple of the questions that we've gotten repeatedly, initially, do a brief overview to respond to those questions, and then just open it up to my colleagues as well as board members to ask additional questions around where we are in the process and where we plan to go. So in the design of the course, I think the first thing to mention is we have 10 years of information related to capstone projects that our students have been doing since around 2011 or 2012. I don't remember exactly which year we launched it, but I'm pretty certain it's going on 10 years at this point, as well as a deeply reflective component that is embedded into the IB courses that we brought into our program 4 years ago. So the combination of the type of reflection that students were doing through the capstone process, as well as, Moira, I'm sorry, you had your hand up.
I'm getting texts that the live stream isn't working. So I'm sorry, I apologize to interrupt, but I'm getting multiple families texting me, asking me if the stream is working or not. And I just checked it and I don't see it on YouTube.
Evan, so it says we're live streaming, but apparently we're not.
It looks like the link on this Zoom that's showing YouTube is live. There's 4 people watching right now. So Kevin, I just wonder if that link is the same that was distributed to the public.
All right, now I'm getting someone saying they just got on. Okay, so
there's usually a small delay from when we go live to when it actually hits YouTube.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I'll keep checking it though and let you know if it's not working.
Should we start fresh, Julia? And we, as context, we might, given that the public is, we ought to summarize that what we're talking about is a state requirement for 1 credit required of all students for graduation, and that we are responding to that requirement. And we're trying to do that in a way that is robust and is worthy of the time. And that what you're talking to us tonight about is the plans at the moment on how we're going to meet that requirement.
Yes, the plans for the moment, as well as how we would like to continue to evolve as we move forward.
Good.
Thank you for that summary. And so in discussing the capstone and the IB classes specifically, what they have offered us in terms of background information to this new graduation requirement is the value added of providing time and space for students to engage in deep reflection about their learning, and is at the core of the instructional practices that we believe in as a district. So we're really looking at a metacognitive development within our students of how are they developing these competencies through their classroom experience of 13 years, and then having a culminating experience in their senior year to demonstrate those competencies as a showcase of what they've learned over the course of that time. This is all sort of the philosophical part and the why. You know, why make it a class instead of maybe approaching it in a different way? In putting it forward as a class, the initial thinking came from conversations that Joel and I had this past summer with principals in our Southern Connecticut Conference group. In particular, we were intrigued by how Daniel Hand High School and Amity High School were approaching the mastery-based diploma assessment. That said, they didn't take the exact same approach that we did, but they did have the similarity of creating a class for students to take to demonstrate some of the competencies that are in the Portrait of the Graduate draft document that we currently have. The Portrait of the Graduate is a very consistent document that's being forged across the state. Different schools are in different places with it. We are currently going through the process of developing one that is district-wide. But to get the process started, we looked at the reflection qualities that we were asking of our students in their student success plans, if they were a student taking an IB course or in the diploma program, the learner profile descriptors, as well as what we were looking for as in the mission and vision of the school. And so that was our starting place. We created a draft document of 5 competencies and began to craft an initial course that allowed students time, space, and support from a classroom teacher to go through this process of reflection and self-evaluation. The second question we've been getting a lot of is, what is the course? What is the structure of it? And I would like to, before describing that, add the caveat that it's a work in progress, meaning as we are taking in feedback from the community and from our students, more specifically, the class is already beginning to evolve and change to try to make it a more rich and valuable experience for the student and from the student perspective. That said, in its initial iteration, the junior level semester length course is a series of 5 segments or units. Each of those segments focuses on one competency in the Portrait of the Graduate. And those include critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity and innovation as one category, and international mindedness. So the students begin with a more structured approach from the teacher in terms of a demonstration or a initial foray into what is this competency, what are real world applications that you see outside of the classroom experience, and then looking back over your learning so far in the last 13 years How have you been developing this over time? And where do you see it happening in your classes right now? That is an exploratory time frame. And there are some activities and assignments that the teachers have developed that are pretty prescriptive in terms of just starting to think about how this applies to the students in their lives, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. At that point, the teacher releases the students to either use previous projects and or pieces of work from classes, other classes, or if there's something that they've been working on outside of the classroom, be it a community service project or whatever the interest may be, the students can then bring that into a demonstration, a mini demonstration of how that fits that particular competency. As the course builds over the time of the semester and they get through to the 5th piece, what they start to realize and recognize is that there's a lot of crossover and cross-pollination between these different competencies. And the final piece at the end of the semester of their junior year is to either select one that they have already looked at or developed further and talk about how it crosses all of the competencies. In a little bit, I do have some examples, a couple of examples that I can show you of how different students approach those. But keep in mind that a Google slide presentation isn't the only way that students are demonstrating their learning. The 2 examples I happen to have are Google slide presentations, but students have demonstrated these competencies through creating video. They've demonstrated through creating skits. They've done, they have used different online applications to demonstrate their learning, be it through Flipgrid and other online applications that they've become more familiar with in the last 2 years. So there are multiple ways that they can approach the demonstration of their learning and the connections that they're making. What we've learned from the feedback that we've received, and I think that this is probably the best part of the entire process, is that we need to be adaptable and flexible in our approach. If we're genuinely going to speak the language of the portrait of the graduate, that we're encouraging our students to navigate and think about and reflect upon, then as the designers of the course experience, we need to take in direct feedback from what they have experienced in the classroom. And so as a side benefit to meeting with parents and some email communications that we've had, as well as surveys from students, what we're finding is that we're able to start morphing into allowing for more student choice and allowing the students to feel like it's more relevant to the what they want the outcomes to be for themselves. And so that's where we are in terms of transitioning. The final caveat to this is that with a new and approved portrait of the graduate that is K-12, rather than simply the draft document that we have for 9-12, we know that a redesign is going to be necessary in terms of making sure that what we have so far is fully aligned to the new document that's going to be adopted by the district. And what we're seeing in those conversations that we're having as we develop this portrait of a graduate is that there's a lot of alignment to what we already have, which is good news. But it also continues to encourage what I heard Dr. Crystal call continuous cycles of improvement, which is something that we want our teachers to practice as well. We don't want to just rest on our laurels and say, okay, we've got this, we understand it, we're going to move on and just follow this checklist of activities. The idea and the design so far has been to try different approaches to making exploration of these competencies meaningful to the students and to arrive at a place where we're offering the most robust and enriched experience that we can offer them as a graduate of Guilford High School. The benefit of this, I believe, is you're not just leaving GHS with a strong content knowledge, which we know we are accomplishing here, and we're doing that very well, and we will continue to do that well. You're also going to leave here with a rich understanding of who am I as a learner, what strengths do I bring to the table, and what challenges do I have, and can I meet and interact with other people to help balance out those challenges that I do have as a learner. The final question that we've received quite a bit is why 2.4 teaching positions? With the initial design of the class, we knew that we had, excuse me, I just want to get my numbers correct for you. We knew that we have this year 297 juniors who will be seniors next year. And we know that we currently have 264 sophomores who will be juniors next year. With the thought in mind of a course offering, that meant if we did half credit or 1 semester's worth of work in junior year and 1 semester's worth of work in senior year, then we would need a certain number of sections of the course. So a 1 full-time teacher teaching semester courses, you would take 5 courses per semester. That's a total of 10 sections for a full-time teaching position. If we have 10 sections, I'm sorry, if we have 12 sections for our seniors next year, then the class size, if assuming that every senior was enrolled in one of these classes, the class size would be an average of 24 students per section. If we had 12 sections for juniors, then the average class size, again, assuming all juniors were enrolled in the class, would be 22 students per class. And so that is 24 sections, which is the equivalent of 2.4 teaching positions. I want to add a couple of things, though, in terms of the feedback that we've received. It might not be a good fit for every single student to actually enroll in the class. And in the spirit of that flexibility and adaptability, we've heard the community and parents loud and clear that we should look at another design option for students who don't want to have to give up or relinquish a spot in their schedule to be able to fulfill this graduation requirement. And so we have come up with a way to still use the teaching positions. We don't have all of the details fleshed out about exactly how this would look at this moment, but we do have an idea around how can we continue to support the students with a designated faculty member who's helping them through the process and make sure that they have a go-to person to meet the graduation requirement and allow them to accomplish this work independently and outside of enrollment in the class. And then the last thing I would say is there have been a lot of questions about, well, what about senior year? What does that look like? Senior year is when it all comes together. And for lack of a better phrasing, I'm going to call it a passion project, but there's a semester-long project that the senior would engage in, and there would be multiple pathways to accomplish that. It could be through community service work. It could be through something that they just have a deep interest in learning more about. It could be their experiences with performing arts, both inside and outside of their high school experience. It could be, so we want it to be something that the student feels very strongly about in terms of thinking about this passion that they have and how these 5 or however many competencies we wind up with in the final document that the district adopts, how do these competencies figure into this area of interest that they have, and it culminates in a demonstration of that learning. Do we have all of those details ironed out today? We do not. But that sort of gives you a vision of where we were thinking we would be headed. So with that, I've given you sort of the big overarching description and tried to answer in general terms a lot of the questions that we have been receiving. But I want to sort of open it up to Tammy and Joel as well, to speak to some of the concerns we've gotten about what about the social emotional learning component of this? Where does this course, if someone opts to take the course, how do we make sure that we're supporting every student's social emotional learning needs? And then how are we accomplishing that with the independent study as well? So I'm going to sort of pause here and let them jump in.
Joel, I'll start if that's okay with you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tammy Lazat. It's nice to see everybody here, and I'm glad that there are more people listening. Julia and Paul had asked me to come and just kind of talk about, from a counseling support service perspective, this idea of the mastery-based diploma assessment, how we rolled it out. In my tenure at Guilford High School, we've gone through a lot of changes about what we've demanded of kids. A lot of changes, a lot of tough changes for these kids. And the one thing that has been consistent for these kids is this transition from junior to senior year, with the fact that they are forced into doing a reflective process with college and career preparation. They are forced in their essays, they are forced in their resumes, they are forced to communicate in interviews about who they are, what they've done that demonstrates who they are. And we've almost, to some extent, I feel like have underprepared them for that process throughout my tenure. And now that we talk more about social emotional learning, student success plans, many of those components in those two ideas is that self-reflective process. And for a social emotional support service perspective, I couldn't be more excited about how we've kind of rolled it out and tried this first iteration of this mastery-based diploma class, both as a class and then the independent idea for those students who need it. And I'll give you an example as to why I'm really excited. I had the pleasure of working with both of the teachers who are currently working with the students in the mastery-based class. And they asked me to come in and help the students really put into perspective the why behind this class, but really the bigger why are we here as a learner? What is it that Guilford High School wants us to know before we leave? Keying in obviously on the aspects that Julia had talked about around creativity and innovation and communication. And really what I really just started every class with, please respond to the following word. What is it that you feel in here when I say the word senior? And I'm gonna, no lie, I'd say about 95% of that idea for seniors, for those kids, that idea of becoming a senior was stress related. It was pure stress about having to engage in a process of, I've always been told that my value is this grade, or my value is this level, or my value is this. And whether we've directly told them or whether they've gotten that message from colleges or employers, or that's the message that they've had. And that's been consistent way before we've been talking about social emotional learning. That I don't want to tell you how long I've been doing this, but I'm closer to retirement than I am from the start of my career. So you can been here a while. But it's been a consistent theme. And I am, for one, very excited about the idea that we are helping them engage in that in a really rich way. It may not be perfect just yet, but I think that we're on track about being able to help them think differently about themselves and the why of their diploma all of the students right now see this diploma as a piece of paper. But we all know as the adults that we don't want them to see it that way. We want them to really understand that it's really not about whether you're in an AP class or an IB class, or whether you're a budding mechanic, or whether you're going to be the next neuroscientist. Oh, sorry. Sorry, everybody. I'm just standing still, apparently. So it's really not about that. It's really about what have they done as a learner in the class, and what have they learned through their different classes. And what we did in the conversations was we tried really hard to help the kids understand that it's okay to be self-reflective. I feel bad about this, really do. I can't turn it on.
It's very dramatic, Tammy. Don't apologize.
And thank you. I planned it for everybody. You're welcome. There you go. So we want to give them permission to be self-reflective. We really do, because it's scary. It's scary for all of us. But we all know in our own careers, being self-reflective means improvement. Being self-reflective means that we're identifying our own value, and to try and have the students understand that in 4 or 5 years beyond high school, that no one's going to grade you anymore. They're not going to give you an A for your work. You know, you have to find the value in something else, the value in what your gifts are. And the more that you understand your gifts when you're younger and what you bring to the table, like Julia had referenced about knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, knowing how that works for you as an individual and as a group. When you know those gifts, you can apply those gifts to whatever is coming your way. And hopefully it directs some of the decisions that you make. I'm really excited about the opportunity for those kids to engage in that, because I really do believe from a social emotional perspective that it is really supporting exactly what we want them to understand, that there is more value to every student than the grades that they get in the classes that they take. I'm really excited about the fact that it really allows kids to understand that just because they haven't taken a highest level of one subject, or just because they haven't been in all level 1 courses, that there's value. They still bring value to the table. It allows them the forum to really identify that, regardless of what their plan looked like through high school. They've all had the opportunity to understand that value. And then the more they understand that value, the more that they can make connections with their future and be more secure in their decisions as they go forward. I think this mastery-based diploma is really, it's really a good avenue in order to provide that for them. We've been trying it over the years in different ways, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to do that. I really enjoyed the conversations with the students. I'm excited about the next iteration, about what we do next, to help them really identify who they are and what they are. Inherently, they were going to be stressed about any change that we made, because stress brings change, or change brings stress. You know, it just does inherently. And I think they're all grappling with that a little bit, and that's okay. We're gonna walk through that with them. We're gonna listen to their concerns. We're gonna respond to them, and try really hard to make sure that it's a really healthy experience for them, even as we get better at it. I'm not sure if that's exactly what I was called to say, but that's what I have to share. Sorry about the lights again. My bad.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Rabin, assistant principal at the high school. And I don't have a lot to add on to what Tammy and Julia said so eloquently. But I'll just share some of my experience of working with a couple of the ECA independent study kids, and as well as getting in the classroom and seeing what's going on. There was some uneasiness at the beginning of the year, right? It was a schedule change, and there was some uneasiness. But what I saw as time went on was kids taking a deep breath from their schedule, and really reflecting on themselves. The subject matter of the mastery-based diploma assessment class is really them, right? It's themselves. And they're just seeing it through the lens of the competencies. So as time went by, it was great to see the discussions and the reflections that were happening, and they, excuse me, they were comfortable, and they were loose, and they were interested, because they got to pick the topics that they wanted to work on, or there were interesting activities that were really about who they were, what competencies they have right now, and kind of where they're going to go with them. really I'm really excited about the mastery-based diploma assessment class as well. And I think we're just starting, we're scratching the surface with what we will do with the course. I think of it I have a professional background as a trader and as a partner in a trading firm. Well, I didn't ask anybody to do the Pythagorean theorem or to do any kind of biology for me, but I did ask them about perseverance, about their communication skills, how they collaborate with a team, right? So I think it's so important that they have this time to really think about who they are as learners, think about their thinking, the metacognition piece. And I think it's been a wonderful experience so far. And I think the kids have seen that as well as they progress through. And there were some who had the discussion, should I do it independently? Should I stay in the class? And when they stayed in the class, a lot of them have come back to me and said, I'm glad I stayed. It was definitely worthwhile. So I think we're building something great here, and the Porch of the Graduate is going to be such an important piece of who we are. Those are my experiences.
The only thing I'd just like to jump in and add, if I may, Dr. Hirsch, one of the things that I was really proud of when the high school team first designed the course was that by making time and space for it within the student schedule, they were communicating the value that they were placing on this particular type of learning. And you've heard Joel and Tammy and Julia all speak to that. What I'm also really proud of, however, is their flexibility and willingness to go back to the drawing board and recognizing that allowing students and families to choose between the course schedule embedded option or the independent option, even into next year. While that wasn't part of the original design thinking, we heard that feedback. We have looked at that feedback. We've determined that we're able to be flexible in that way. And we're going to leave that option available for students. And then we're going to monitor those two options. And we will continue to support and advise students moving forward based on what we learn. And so we're going to open up that opportunity. Choice is a positive. We're happy to be able to provide the choice this year, and we'll keep an eye on it. And as we learn, as students go through that experience, we'll be able to advise the students coming behind them about what each of those two options offers. And in fact, it happens without us. Siblings will recommend to their younger siblings whether it was beneficial to be in the course or whether they were happy to do it independently. But we know that that responds to one of the most significant concerns that was raised, and we're really happy that we're able to respond to it and maintain the values and the value of the course that you've heard everybody from the high school speaking about. And I'll go back to mute so I can keep coughing without interrupting your meeting.
Questions from other members of the board?
I would just, Dr. Hirsch, excuse me, I just wanted to make a point about the self-efficacy piece here. And I think that Tammy spoke to that really well. But when we're looking at mastery type coursework, where students are not given traditional grades, but are looked at in terms of the mastery of competencies, there is a building over time of a sense of self-efficacy. And when you talk about college and career readiness, self-efficacy is one of the most important things that you can develop in someone who's going out into the workforce. That feeling that they have accomplished things, that they can accomplish things, and having the high school experience with the support of facilitators who are going to work with them to reflect and be metacognitive and develop their ability to achieve those mastery goals. I think that's a very critical experience for students to have before they go out into the world.
You just, you said something important, which was this is not going to be traditionally graded. Which is not simply part of the philosophy of mastery learning, but in some sense speaks to the issue of trying to de-stress the traditional notion of what it means to go through high school. And so the way this was described tonight, it sounds like this is a very conscious, purposeful attempt to have students integrate their intellectual, social, and emotional lives around what they've already learned and what they may be learning in the future, so that it doesn't happen by chance. And that, as Tammy says, may enable them to be much more thoughtful and articulate about the way in which they either apply to colleges and or future jobs. And that integration sounds to be like a pretty good way of moving students away from the normal compartmentalization that high school is about, junior high school as well. Take a class, forget that, take the next class, forget that. So that there, while we may not like that, that egg crate compartmentalization is where kids are, and we're not doing them a lot of justice. So this sounds at least a little bit more rich in the way that you've been talking about than I think people out watching us may have understood.
Dr. Hirsch, in a lot of ways, it's going to be graded in a way that students may not see again until they reach graduate school or the world of work. You know, a mastery course, a mastery expectation, there's only 2 grades. You have reached mastery or not yet. And the students are required to meet the mastery level. If the project isn't complete, if it doesn't show mastery, you don't mark it with a C and everybody agree that we're done and we go home. The students have to return to that project and make the revisions, respond to the feedback until it reaches mastery, which is what we see in the world of work. Your boss doesn't tell you, okay, this report is a C, thank you very much. The boss tells you, you're staying late tonight because this isn't done yet. This needs to be finished. And I think, as everybody has said, that's a meaningful and healthy experience for students to be exposed to.
And that, I think, gives another reason for why a course, it can be helpful, because within a course structure, the definition of what competency means, the definition of the standards that people need to meet, the ability for students to talk about that and internalize it, as opposed to just doing it on their own as independent study, is, I think, a greater chance of there being some larger sense of that, what mastery means. So I can see now where this is beginning to come together, and that the long test of this will be that over a year or two, most students will gladly opt into a course structure rather than an independent study where you're on your own while others are actually having a chance to talk to each other, get mentored by individuals, and so on and so forth. But I thought there were some questions. Kristen, you had a question earlier.
Thanks. I have a few. I guess I'm just curious about maybe Julia, you can just walk us through an example or two. I can't quite picture how a class happens. Like, how is there a class structure if there are multiple students working on completely different topics? So I'm just a little bit confused about how that looks. So I guess I'll start with that. Thanks.
So I think one way to think about it is not unlike when you are in one of our tech ed classes or an art class. There might be a common demonstration or activity that everyone participates in initially to illustrate the idea or the concept that you're learning about. And then students are released to work either alone or in groups. And we're finding in these classes, a lot of students are opting to work in groups. And what the teacher's role at that point is to engage in conferring with the students. So as the teacher, you're moving around the room, you've provided a common experience for everyone to use as a springboard experience into, okay, so now what does this mean for me? And then when you get to that phase of the process, you're either electing to work with others with you in the class, or in some cases, students opted to work alone, but then chose people outside of the class to work with on particular demonstrations. But the teacher's role throughout is to, they're not just sort of sitting there and letting the kids flounder on their own. They are there to help brainstorm with them to help them have a thought partner in terms of where do I want to go next with this, to run ideas by in terms of if I wanted to do this instead, could I? And then talk through. So for example, some students have said, could I make a video instead of a reflective essay? Could I demonstrate my learning in some alternate format? And the teachers have been working with the students to allow them to do those things, but you still want to make sure that they are demonstrating mastery of the competency, right? And so the teacher's role in that respect is to individualize the learning as much as possible, but to use more of a conference structure to meet with students and help them move forward in the process. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. And first of all, this whole meeting helps. This was so great. Thank you all very much for coming and for talking to the board. I'm really in favor of I'm glad that we added the 2.4 FTEs. This seems to me like a big project that we've all got to deal with, and I don't see how we would do it without adding the extra staff members. So that I'm glad that we did. So a couple of other questions. Just hypothetically, so am I understanding it correctly to say, like, let's say student A is going to work on something that has to do with music, and she's going to work on the violin, and there's going to be some sort of mastery about the violin. And let's say student B wants to do something that's outside of kind of academia, so to speak, like something that's not offered in the high school. Like this kid volunteers at High Hopes Therapeutic Horseback Riding Center in Old Lyme, and they want to talk about their work with kids who have muscular dystrophy or something like that. Like, is that the kind of stuff that this can also include? Like, can it be extracurricular based, and then they're taking the concepts, the 5 concepts that you described, and they're figuring out how those concepts play into something that's more of an extracurricular type activity rather than something we would think of as a traditionally academic curricula?
Yes, so we wouldn't necessarily have violins playing and horseback riding happening in the classroom all at the same time, but there could be a group of students working on a project about what they do at the horse barn, and another group of students talking about what they do when they compose and perform a piece in that classroom at that same space. There's nothing to suggest that the classroom component means there won't be at home work to be done, just like every other class has homework, but you'll have the classroom to bring it together and synthesize and aggregate the work while other students are doing something similar all around you at the same time. But it won't be a 3-ring circus with horses and animals and violins.
That sounds like a lot more fun. I mean, come on.
It's actually the perfect example of what I was trying to get to, is that some students, because they're not an academic, so to speak, I mean, we label them. So I'm just, because they're not, their gifts don't seem to get fulfilled in academia, that doesn't mean they don't have them. And the ability for them to explore that and really tap into those ideals that they're just as valuable to our community, to each other in the classroom, and to themselves. That's what is setting a tone for them about how to really, really be introspective and really identify what they're about, and then how that can push them forward.
Great.
I think,
thank you,
Kristen, it also adds, and Tammy was, I think, suggesting this in how she responded, it adds authenticity from the student side, right? If I'm doing, 20 problems of math homework at night, and I will do the math homework because I know I need to do the math homework to do well in the math class, to get the grade, to get the credit, to go on to whatever happens next. What this is offering the student the opportunity to see is some of those skills and competencies that you developed in math class cross over into real world things that you're actually passionate about and love. And so that goes back to Aneen's comment about self-efficacy. Then I'm seeing myself in a different light. Maybe I'm never going to be 100% comfortable in the math situation, I'll do the work because I'm a hard worker, but I will see myself in a different light if I look through these competency lenses to see what do I bring to the table when I'm volunteering in the community at the horse barn or the equestrian center. What do I bring to the table when I am problem solving how to rebuild a vintage car from ground zero? You know, those are the kinds of things that our students do on their own time. And to be able to pull that back into the school setting, I think builds their confidence in terms of who they are as a learner and what they can do when they leave high school.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Kristen, I just want to interject that it might help to think of the structure of the course as a workshop, because, you know, artists and musicians, they workshop things. And so thinking about the common experiences that the kids will have will revolve around things that are common to all kinds of presentations and projects and experiences, like just the structure of an effective project, how to relay your message effectively, how to come up with an idea, how to develop an idea. Those are the things that the experiences that everyone will get. And then the workshop model is wonderful because there's opportunities for these small group and individualized instruction. And the ultimate goal is real individualization. The kids are getting to build on their strengths and really make connections across their learning experiences. Because one of the things, and I talk about this with the teachers all the time, one of the things that we notice is students will learn something in one grade or one class, and then they go to the next grade or the next class, and the teacher says, well, you learned this last year. And the kids say, no, I didn't. I never saw that before. And we know that they've seen it before. So here is that metacognitive opportunity to think about how all of these things they're learning are connected through the lens of these competencies. So how have you communicated, using communication as an example, because that is one of ours. How have you communicated effectively in your math classes or in your art classes or your music classes? You know, where has communication come into play? Where has collaboration come into play? And it really is that reflective piece where kids are having these aha moments saying, oh yeah, you know, now I see why I did that. And now I see why that was important. And now I see how those things are connected.
And if I can add one more thing, I actually also see the value that as they're learning this about themselves, they see the examples in other people. So they're learning the value of the other people around them. And I had an example when I went into one of the classes, the instructor and I were waiting for the kids to come in. And we were just sitting there, you know, having a conversation. And one of the students said, is this an example of communication? Is this what you guys are trying to portray to us? And we were just like, no, we're having a conversation. But it was really interesting that he related that to the process that he was trying to really that he identified that. I was just like, wow, that's for the day. That was awesome. So.
Good. Thank you all.
John.
I want to echo Kristen's sentiment as well. This has been hugely helpful, so thank you. Julia, one of the things you said was that you're exploring options for students to be able to take this without enrolling in the course. And we had heard from parents and students as well that they wanted to explore that option for lack of not being able to take certain full credit courses in place of this half credit course. So I know it's early and you just starting talking about that option, but is there anything that you can kind of, shed light on exactly what that might look like for students that choose to do this on their own?
So I think the next steps in general for both options, both the course as well as an independent study option, once we have finalized the district portrait of the graduate, I think the next important step is to, when you look at the documents that were sent out, the source documents that were sent out to all of you in terms of what the state, is asking of us, the next step, I think, is to really look at the rubrics specifically. And we want to make sure that those rubrics are standards-based rubrics and not, a grade-based rubric, so to speak. Not that rubrics are supposed to be grade-based, but some of them have kind of turned into that over time. And so a standards-based rubric, and they're called different things by different people, right? The International Baccalaureate world calls them mark schemes. Whatever you call it, it sets particular criteria up so that the student has a sense of whether they're approaching or they've met. And in some cases can exceed, depending on how the rubric is written. There are some examples that the state has put out for people to look at as examples. Once we have that piece in place, I think what that allows us to do is, for the students who are enrolled in the course, we continue to bring in as much and continue to push as much student choice and that authentic learning experience as possible to maximize the experience for them in the course. To your question, John, about the independent study piece, the student who opts for the independent study is going to have to be a very self-directed learner. So they are going to have to be the student who is willing to take those rubrics and pull from their experiences both in and outside of the classroom and meet with their teacher to complete the demonstration component, the reflection and the demonstration component. So I think that's the biggest difference. If you're doing an independent study, you still have access to a reliable point person who can help you through the process, but it'll be, in terms of managing your own learning, self-management of learning, you are the one who's going to be seeking out the assistance. You are the one who's going to be sort of developing those competencies on your own, and then arranging to meet with the teacher frequently enough that you can continue to make progress to receive the full credit. So it's less
so the support is
structured.
there. The support is there. It's
The
less
support
structured,
is
but the
there,
support
but
is
it's
still
less
there.
structured. Correct.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So I do support the 2.4 teachers and all the support that the kids get. All that's great, and the insight, like all the stuff you guys have talked about tonight, obviously are wonderful things. What I'm having a problem with, and what my concern is, mostly because I've received a number of emails and communications, is why it has to be so big and independent, and why it can't be more wrapped into something that's already existing for the students. Like if they're in a history class and they're writing a paper, and sort of mold it into something that they're already doing, rather than being this independent, standalone sort of thing.
I'll respond to that initially and then turn it back to the team. But I think the answer to that is because we responded to the requirement, to the state mandate, and to the materials that were released, we think, in the spirit in which they were released, right? It's a standalone credit. In our reading of that, the standalone credit cannot be layered over another separate standalone credit. It was something that is separate and apart from the other 24 credits that are listed in the statute. We didn't choose to do this. It is a mandate by the state, but having received the mandate, we approached it in the way that we approach everything in Guilford. We were going to do it well, and we were going to make it value added for our students. I look back to the 2020 legislation, or the 2012 legislation that changed teacher supervision evaluation in the state of Connecticut. You could have taken a new evaluation document off the shelf that the state had already provided and just run all of your staff through that. That would have met all the requirements of that legislation. We didn't do that. We pulled together a team. We worked for a year. We wrote our own evaluation document. We did it in a way that we thought provided more value to the teachers, met not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So I know that different schools are approaching it in different ways across the state. We wanted to ensure that we were doing something that was going to pull together and synthesize the experience in a way that was going to be valuable for students, and we're not adding another compliance activity for the students or for the staff at school. and I just think that's the answer. We read the legislation and we approached it in a way and always took the opinion that we were going to do it well. I think that there are faster and less impactful ways to do that, but I think that, you know, that's not the way that we're going to approach the work in Guilford. And I'm pleased to say that I didn't have to have a sit down and say that to anybody at the high school, right? The high school team went into this work knowing that that's the way that we do work in Guilford, and that's the way that we respond to any expectation, whether it's local or state.
I will add that I think the way I was envisioning it in our early conversations was influenced by what I saw the theory of knowledge course doing for the IB classes when you are a diploma student. So, and what I mean by that is you're taking a deep dive into the content when you're enrolled in the IB course content class, like IB biology, IB history, what have you. There are some connections to theory of knowledge in the class experience, in the content focused experience. But what the theory of knowledge course does is it creates the space and the time for the student to make authentic connections between all of the classes. And so I think I gravitated toward the idea of a class initially because I was thinking, how wonderful would it be if our students had that rich experience, any student at Guilford High School, to the depth and ability that they can, had that experience before they graduated. Because what we're hearing from our graduates is that when they've done a capstone project or they've gone through the diploma program and had this theory of knowledge experience, they're graduating with a richer perspective than someone who didn't necessarily opt to do those things. And so that's where I sort of conceived of the value added possibility that this class offers.
And just to follow up to that, just another concern in some of the emails, are you looking at maybe offering some more half credit classes for students to, I guess some of the, like the math's off, right? If you have a half credit this semester, you kind of need another half credit. Is there any more expansion of that for options for the students to do something else so they do get some extracurricular in there if they had to give it up?
Tammy, I'm going to ask you to help me out on this one a little bit, but I think that that's an ongoing and pressing concern for the high school across the board, is balancing out the 1-year elective options with half-year elective options. And so I think that I'm not giving you a direct answer because I don't have an immediate plan for that today, but I do think that that's important feedback for us to have in mind as we move forward and develop additional courses. So one course that we're designing right now is a forensics course, which will be a new STEM offering at the high school next year. That course will be a half-year option. So we are grappling with that, and I think that we have that in mind. Tammy, do you want to add to what I've already said?
Sure. I mean, we already have some more academic electives in the social studies department that are half year, like law and U. There's plenty of business courses that are half year courses that balance it out, and obviously things like the art courses, any of that is also. I mean, so I think we're broadening that because Julia's right. It's not just the mastery base that poses that problem, for us, or that we need to be able to allow those year-long and semester courses, and we're just not there yet. I mean, it's always a thought, but I look forward to brainstorming some other options because I have a few, Julia, just to let you know.
And I'm just going to float this as a note for the board. It certainly creates a bigger opportunity for that, Jen. It creates more of a demand for half-year courses. I just want to note that half-year courses may have impacts on some FTEs, because if the half-year course, so look at all the heads nodding from the high school administration and guidance office, a half-year course that falls into a subject area that doesn't fit as neatly could end up adding partial FTEs in each of those different subject areas. So it's an exciting opportunity. I just want to earmark it for the board that it could represent future investments in future years as we create more space for those half-year opportunities. It wouldn't be big FTE increases, but it might be partial FTEs in a bunch of different departments to be able to offer that half-year course. And that's not a bad thing. I just want to name it before I bring those recommendations to you in a future budget year, and be able to say we noted this when we talked back on.
Moira?
Thank you, Dick. And thank you all of you for really taking the time to present this and kind of give us a little more substance to what, has to this point been a little confusing, I think, for families to understand the intention behind the class. So thank you. And just off of what Dr. Freeman said, like Jen, I've been getting a lot of questions, a lot of texts, a lot of emails from families. I've had some Zoom calls with parents. And on the cusp of that half credit issue, I mean, you can understand, and I think this is the concern for a lot of kids and parents, is that by pulling out that half of a year, it kind of eradicates the possibility of a full year course, like a language or an elective. It does. And so they end up with a study hall the second half, when really a lot of these kids would love to be taking class. And so, in talking about the independent class piece, I'm anticipating that until I think families and kids start to see this class roll out for a few years and really get comfortable with these competencies. I'm on the committee that's developing the new Portrait of a Graduate document, and we spent 45 minutes talking about 2 competencies yesterday in little think groups, and it was great and it was rich and all of that, but it helped me understand that this is something that's going to take time to evolve, and for a bunch of adults and educators to sit around and talk about it and struggle with it, likely our students are going to have even a harder time. So it's not something that's going to snap our fingers, it's going to be ready next year. So in terms of that independent piece, I know we're hopefully with the budget passing, we will have this additional staffing. But if we do have a tilt in the scale and we have more kids electing for now to do the independent, I guess it would just be good to maybe, as we move through the year, to get a better understanding what that's going to look like. If staff has to shift from maybe 12 sections to 6 sessions, we have no idea. We won't know that till all the kids select their courses for next year. But one thought that I had in talking to a parent was, well, maybe those independent kids could meet as a group independently, and maybe a staff could be available for them, almost like in a college level, like office hours or something. I mean, there's so many ways that could be enriched as well. But just curious I know John touched on this, but I think a lot of families, now that that option is there, would love to know if there's some thought to kind of developing that as well.
There has. We've talked about structurally what that will look like. So essentially all the students will enroll in the course. They will either enroll for the schedule-based course or they will enroll for the independent study. All of the students will be assigned to one of those 2.4 teachers, and the teachers' schedules will slide as necessary on student enrollment. So one teacher might have all of her classes scheduled during the regular schedule. They meet regularly within the bounds of the school day. The other teacher might only have 3 scheduled courses and 2 sections worth of independent students that teacher is monitoring. The teacher in that condition would likely have her schedule slide so that she didn't come in for the first scheduled period in the morning, but had more time available in the afternoon. There will be some limits to that. These teachers will not be able to meet with a group of students who come together independently at 9 o'clock at night, right? But the teacher could have a later start and a later finish, like teachers in the alternative high school currently do. And so all of the students will be attached to a teacher, and that teacher will be supporting those students. But the reality is, to Julia's point, if you're in the independent study, there will be a greater independent expectation, not complete, but greater than for the students who are in the regularly daily scheduled component. That teacher who has a large number of independent students wouldn't only have some extra time in the afternoon, but would have periods during the school day that were unscheduled as well. So if students had the availability or the flexibility to touch base during those times, that could happen as well. We do have precedent for independent study at the high school, just not to this scale. This will be doing it, at least in the initial years, it'll be doing it in a larger scale. We've had initial conversations with the Teaching Association. We've got a tentative agreement for how this will work moving forward. It's going to be impacted by how many sign up for the daily scheduled class and how many sign up for the independent experience. But we've got the flexibility to meet that need, however it falls for this first year. I think to Tammy's point, and I think, Moira, you just said it, as students begin to experience the course and recognize the value that we see in the course, we think that number may come down. It may never go away. But I think the first few years where students were already thinking about what courses they want to do next year, the numbers may be the highest.
Great, thank you. And one other thought I had, and some of you folks talked about this, the feedback. I think it would be really helpful and beneficial maybe to create a survey or something of the students who are currently in the course, and maybe parents, I don't know, it's probably a bit of work, but it would be really great to get that feedback just to develop. I can't see it being harmful. I think it'd be really helpful, but it's just a thought and idea, and it's been suggested to me by some parents as well.
Moira, I'm glad you brought that up. We have done that, and we will continue to do that. When I said student input, it was directly solicited from the students. We did not send a parent survey out because our primary focus initially was to enhance the student experience and the relevance for the student and their perspective. That said, I continue to invite parents to reach out to me. We are very interested in their input, and it's interesting to hear the perspective from the students and the parents, right? Because it doesn't always line up exactly. So I don't want to sound like I'm cutting the parents off at the knees. We would love to hear from them, and we have already, and we continue to invite them to reach out to us so that we can navigate this together. But the students, we have been actively asking them how the experience has been going since the onset of the course, and plan to continue to do that this semester, and then use that for planning purposes as we start writing these rubrics, standards-based rubrics, and moving the process forward for independent study as well as a course design.
Great, thank you.
Christy, you had your hand up?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much for this. And I also want to, thank the parents who have reached out to the board, and even students. I'm relatively new to the board, but one of the hardest things I feel like is I want to hear more from people. I want to get bigger perspectives. So this particular topic seems to have driven a lot of community interest. So it's been really just wonderful. And, everybody's been like looking to come to the table and come up with a good plan. Everybody's interests are in the best of the students. So it's been nice just hearing parents share their perspectives, hearing from the students. I had a million questions, but I'll just try to pick a simple one. Is there anything currently planned that will gate which students can and cannot opt in for the independent study? And I apologize if you already talked about that. I noticed like in some districts, if a student hasn't completed it by their senior year, it looked like those districts have opted to then jump on those kids and be like, okay, you didn't get it done. Now you have to take this half credit by your senior year, or will it just be left open next year that any students who would like to go for it can go for it? Is there going to be a GPA requirement? Is it, yeah, how are you going to determine the cutoff?
So right now it's completely open. I would say the only caveat I would add to that would be students who have an individual education plan. If they have particular goals that they are working on, then they might be better suited to have the class, but we would make sure that it's fully aligned to the individual education plan that the student has. So we wouldn't just arbitrarily, say you must take the course, but you cannot. And to make a GPA requirement for it, I think that kind of flies in the face of building up the self-efficacy that we want this to accomplish. If I'm a student who isn't as motivated by school as maybe someone else is, should I be penalized? You know what I mean? Like, I think we want to honor the process that the student wants to engage in. And if we design the course really well and there's a buy-in to the benefits that the students see, then I would argue that we're on the right track because more students start to take the course. If that does not happen, then it means we need to continue to work on the design and make, whether it's not, maybe it takes another format or iteration in the future. So I'm going to go back to that idea of continuous cycles of improvement, right? Tammy, you wanted to jump in.
I did, because I wanted to be completely open with everyone. We've had conversations with different students about what choice would be healthy for them, because based on our knowledge of certain students doing that independent process, we might guide them away from that right now because they're not quite at that space. We might see the junior year as, hey, let's do the class thing. Let's really understand the competencies. And then for the senior year, maybe you're looking at something different because maybe you've built up the skill sets, the soft skills that support that process. So that's really a rich experience. So we've had conversations with students. We've had them reflect about the reflecting process and how best to approach it, just based on their own, really what they've been able to demonstrate so far and whether that would add more stress to their plate or not, in all honesty. So,
but we view that as guidance, not gatekeeping. We would rather collaborate than say no, or
yeah.
We would rather encourage than say you must. It's guidance, not gatekeeping. Yep.
Yeah, it's not my decision, but we talk about where they're at, and what they're able to handle and not handle, and where they want to go and what they want to learn. So
I would only add that we would more than likely try to front load the independent study projects because we do want to have a safety net, right? Because it is a graduation requirement. So as we did this year, we had independent studies that some are still progressing, even though it was supposed to be a semester course. So that more than likely would be try to be a first semester independent study so that if we have to fall back to the course in the second half, we can.
I just want to echo the sentiments of gratitude for all of you coming tonight. I feel like I've heard tonight, or I have an understanding of this process that is much deeper than I understood before, and I'm particularly interested and appreciating the self-efficacy, self-reflection piece in a way that I don't think I understood or appreciated before. And I'm a researcher, so my N of 2 is not particularly meaningful, and I should be very careful. But it is a stressful time, right? That junior and senior year is a stressful time, and there's a piece of it that I think I witness that's about kids trying to be who the college wants them to be, or kids trying to be make themselves into what the next step, how they'll get to the next step. And while there's just a reality, and I'm going to call it what we call it, to playing that game, something gets lost in that process. And the idea that there is an opportunity here for kids for our students to reflect on, gain some real kind of self-knowledge about what works for me, what are my strengths. I'm repeating what I've heard here, right? How do I learn best? Like, what are the things I'm most interested in? How can I really, and then how we as a district can give some of our students an opportunity to embrace something they authentically really like that doesn't happen in a large part of their academic day. This just seems like I'm appreciating the thought and the approach that's taken here. I'm kind of excited to watch it unfold. So thank you for taking the time tonight, and thank you just for the thought that went into what this could mean for students and what we could be providing them.
I just want to take a moment also. I wanted to wait until we were nearing the end of this conversation, but as the high school team has been working on this, a couple things have played out. One is that we had a NEASC visit, and we had educators from around the state come in and spend time at our high school. And two, I know that the team, and Julia in particular, have been reaching out to other schools. What's happening is we're trying to learn more about what other schools are doing, and as they start to learn about our model, we're hearing that we're influencing other schools who are moving closer to our model. So as we're calling them to ask them what they're doing, they're finishing the conversation by saying, you know, we kind of like what you guys have started working on. Can we hear more about that? The NEASC group in particular, I think, visited one of these classes, and a number of those folks walked away really impressed by the way that our team was approaching this. And so, again, I think that in time, as we start to really do better with this, and I think we're doing better for the feedback that we've been hearing and the conversations that we've engaged in as a community, I think you're going to see that we do have a really good model, and it's a model that's going to be appreciated by the state and probably copied by other districts around the state as well.
Paul, when you mention NEASC, you're referring, for the larger audience, to our accreditors, the New England accreditors that come in and determine whether or not we remain accredited. What I like about this is it's increasingly becoming clear that we recognize, as the educators recognize, that students are stressed. All the things that parents are telling us, students are telling us, and it crescendos in the last 2 years as they start following what Katie was saying, that lockstep into giving people something they think they want. And then they end up finding out that they're less of themselves than they ever wanted to be. We're really asking them to say, it's really important that you begin to form a strong voice, your own identity. This efficacy issue is a strong sense of oneself, not an ego-driven thing where you're of a large ego, but a strong one, that you have a sense of security so you can articulate your own voice. That's going to be incredibly crucial when they have to articulate what they want to do, where they want to college, and why they think that particular place is where they want to go, or whether they want to interview for a job and they get asked questions about, well, how do you fit in? Or what are you looking for? What are you asking for us? To the degree that we're now going to give a purposeful, non-accidental experience, asking students to engage in that reflection, but at the same time, not just arbitrarily, but with some sort of feedback and standards, seems to me that we would be going along, if it's done right, will de-stress students in a way that we know they already are. And if it works well, students should feel much more comfortable in articulating who they are and what they were really wanting to go after as they go into these applications of the rest of their lives. So it sounds like this really has a powerful potential. And I just don't want to lose it as we explain it to the public over and over, because as it's evolving, it's getting, I think, much more existential in nature in terms of what's good for students, and not just a requirement or more hours. The state, by accident, perhaps, has added a requirement that we've taken advantage of in order to do justice to students' growth, as opposed to lay on more of what they're already doing to get a credit hour. And I think that distinction is the one that Paul was talking about. The Guilford way is not more of the same. And that the other part of this is, if it really works well, the model of mastery can easily become applied to other parts of our programs. That is, mastery learning is something that we might want to see go into other aspects of our curriculum. So we're running a natural experiment. We've got independent study students, and we've got students in a class, and we're going to be able to find out, although the samples may not be the same, but we may find out in real time the benefits of each. And if we're careful about really monitoring that, we're going to learn a lot. Jennifer.
Just two, hopefully quick, fairly easy questions. Is there any way that this program can actually be used to help maybe the students write their essays for their college applications? Like, could that be the project, is to write their essays?
So currently in the senior English curriculum at the beginning of the school year, there is a unit that is, it's narrative writing, but it's focused on the college essay specifically. However, if there is, I think that there's opportunities here where we could have more, if this course is working in tandem with the competencies that are happening in other classes, I think we can come to a place where we can look at things like that. I kind of want to give you another example of something that just came up. So in the communication competency, for example, the teachers had taken a particular approach with it, and we're kind of encouraging the students to do a particular activity to demonstrate communication. And the students in real time in the class said, why can't we set up interviews to develop our communication skill? That's a real world skill that we haven't had a lot of practice with. Could we set up mock interviews as a way to develop our communication competency? And the teacher was like, absolutely, let's do that. So what I'm saying is, I think that those possibilities are there, and we're already in process of taking that feedback from students and embedding those choices and opportunities into the class. So I know you were focused specifically on the college essay, but I think that the students are becoming very vocal about different things that they are interested in learning more about that have a real world application for them. So I think that, yes, in short, the answer is yes. I think that those possibilities exist and we are open to them.
Awesome. And the last one is, what about like summertime? Is there a way where the kids may be able to do some of this work over the summer rather than doing it during the regular school year? Or instead maybe incorporating maybe an internship or something that you're doing over the summer into all of that? I mean, it's broad and general, and I know it's not the best question, but
I'll start because I want to give a contractual answer. So to come from the second half first, I think, yes, students will absolutely have the opportunity to incorporate summer internships or other structured activities that they may engage in over the summer in the activities, but we don't currently have a structure that would provide staffing support. We don't have teacher support available to the students. There was nothing built in to the budget that was built for this that would provide staffing over the summer to provide a structured, and quite honestly, as I say these things out loud, I'm not sure about statutory limitations for credit bearing work that gets done over the summer. Summer tends to be reserved for remedial work, credit recovery, or extension, but credit bearing I'd have to look into.
But that's not to say, Paul, that a student thinking about their senior year in the summer of their junior year says, I'm going to do a job or internship on this. And I want to I'm looking at it as a grist for something I want to extend into my course in the fall for the seniors.
Yes.
And so all of that becomes content as it were, an experience that they can make use of. They might take notes over the summer. They may have a log which they keep, which all
That's
of a sudden
exactly right.
becomes part of their narrative. And that doesn't require extra faculty time. It just requires some good planning before they do it so they can make use of it later.
That's exactly right.
And I would add to that, with the homework policy that we adopted a few years ago, we are trying to be respectful of students' time away from school to experience enrichment, to have, non-academic experiences. That said, I agree with what Dr. Hirsch said. There is an opportunity for those enrichment experiences over the summer to be the fodder for that independent study when they start in the fall. So I don't think that we have dedicated time and space over the summer for students to come in and meet with a teacher. But I do think that depending on the interest of the student and the pathway that they want to take, they can use those summer enrichment activities as the basis for their demonstration for mastery-based diploma assessment.
So I have a question. Can students fulfill this requirement by doing a collaborative project? Can 2 students or 3 students come together and say, we're writing a 1-act play with music, or we're going to design a home and we're going to actually build a small little place for a playhouse for kids? I mean, or does it have to be individual?
It can be collaborative. I can show you one example if you'd like me to. I can share, if I can share my screen real quick. And just keep in mind that this is an early example. And so there's opportunity for growth here. We recognize that, but it is an example of 2 students who came together to work on a project that they felt exhibited. It was at the end of the junior course, and it exhibited connections to all of the competencies in the portrait of the graduate.
You should have permissions to share your screen, Julia.
Just what I'm looking for. I had to take evidence of who the students were out of the document. So if you see some missing pieces, it's where I took names out and stuff like that, or I tried to. Here we go. Can you see the screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
So in this example, it was 2 students who decided to work together on this, and they had been working on a more environmentally sustainable playground space in a fast food restaurant like a McDonald's or similar type of place. And so in it, they looked at and did research around what were the primary objectives that they had in terms of for this space to be more LEED green. These were the criteria that they were trying to meet. And so they then, as part of their presentation, went through, and the slides don't indicate obviously what they, the full extent of how they explored each of the competencies, but you can see how they generated a timeline of events to make this happen. They talked about how they worked collaboratively to come to the final project, as well as the communication that was involved. And I thought this was the most interesting piece, even though it has the least amount of information on the slide. I wish I had seen this part of the presentation, because I was interested to hear about, as they were navigating this process, how did they pick and choose which were the most important aspects of this more environmentally and sustainable, using sustainable goods or products to create the playground space? How did they sort of navigate through the process to come up with a unique resolution at the end? And then they touched on international mindedness as well. So this was sort of the culminating project that they presented to the class as a summation of all of the different competencies they had talked about over the course of the semester. And then a companion piece to this was a reflection that they wrote, each of them wrote individually about what they gained from going through this work together. So we're finding, and Joel, you might want to jump in here. I'm going to stop sharing at this point. You might want to jump in here and talk about the trend that you've seen in terms of students opting to work in groups versus individually, because I know you've had a lot of contact with the classes as well.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a little bit of that. I do like that there's the individual piece of the reflection at the end. They get to come together, collaborate, communicate, they're actually using the competencies that they're working on and studying while they're doing the project. I had another one in ECA where it was communication through dance, and they created a dance and then and communicated different things through it. And then obviously they're sharing that part in the reflection, and the creation of the dance piece itself was part of an original mini project. So we are seeing some of that, and definitely open to more.
Yeah. Finally, one of the parents maybe had a frustration in fearing that we weren't going to have that we wouldn't be able to staff independent study, and that's why we wouldn't do it. Raised the possibility that given this talent in this community, suppose a number of parents, a number of community members, they don't have the parents, would volunteer to be mentors to work with students, whether it's in the class or out, on their projects as people who have expertise in that area. Would we be open to that, or does that get to be, does that become a problem?
I think that we have examples of that occurring with the capstone projects. We do, part of the capstone process is to have a mentor in the community who's an expert in the field. The caveat to that is that a certified educator is the one who has to determine the mastery component, right? Yeah. So yes, I think that it would be a rewarding experience, just like the student who is volunteering for the equestrian center would have community contacts that enrich that experience for them, right? You would still go through the process as a student to demonstrate how that fits into those competencies and how you've grown as a result. I think that's an important piece of this, is the growth component is an important one in terms of realizing, what Tammy was referring to earlier. What is it that not only that I'm passionate about, but what do I bring to the table? What skill set do I have that comes easily for me? And where are the areas that I have to work harder, or that I need to seek out assistance in performing better? Which is not easy for anyone to do. I mean, you sort of, life sort of, I don't want to say beat you up, but that's not exactly the word I want, but life sort of, teaches you where your strengths are and where your challenges are, right? And so I think to be a 17 and 18-year-old having that rich experience before you go out into the world, I think that's a good thing, because you have a much better understanding as you venture out, knowing what you can do well and where your challenges are, where you need extra assistance. Because asking for help is something that all of us have to do at some point in our lives. And if you haven't gained that kind of insight yet, you might hold on to old thoughts and feelings that, oh, if I'm asking for help, then I'm not good enough, I'm not ready, I'm not, that it cuts into that self-efficacy right away. So this is another benefit to going through this process, is having the opportunity to have that kind of experience and those types of realizations.
Any further questions? Arnold.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. First of all, Julia, thank you. You obviously, when we first started this conversation, I was thinking, why are you so into this? Other than the obvious fact that you're required to be. But you've really taken the bull by the horns, and it's clear to me that you've put a lot of work, research, study into this. And that's a recurring theme as I've been on the board, and I'm new to the board, that all the faculty and administration has proven. You guys are not messing around. It's all for the learning process. So thank you. Also, I want to point out there's been some lingo thrown around. Metacognitive means thinking about your thinking. Just for the public who might be watching, I had to actually look that up, and I'm an attorney, so but I also want to just reiterate some of the basic points, because I'm kind of like a bullet point sort of person. Basically, this program is going to be either schedule based or independent study based, and if it's independent study, they're still going to have to check in with the teachers, and they'll keep them on course basically. But a lot more of the direction is going to be based upon the student's own initiative. The other part of it is, so that's one point. The second point is, you brought up the idea of the portrait of the graduate. So that's basically, my understanding is that's kind of a working document. And it's going to be further developed as this program develops, but it distills the very issues that you're focusing on for this, cumulative experience. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then I had a recurring question throughout this whole time. That was basically, how do we get basically high performing students as well as low performing students to actually enroll in the class? But it's through this conversation, it's been teased out that basically it's going to be the success of the class itself that's going to draw both low and high performance students into the class. So, I appreciate that. I hope that works. I think it will work. So good luck, and I'm excited about this. So I'll leave it at that.
Anyone else? What's the timeline, Paul, with regard to, in some sense, it being somewhat ready to go for next fall? Is this going to be ready by graduation time? Would we hear again a more finalized conception of where things are?
So we were actually talking earlier this week about the next step, including a more thorough written explanation and description of what the course has, so that we could share that with you, the board, but also have it available for parents who still have questions, weren't able to sit through and watch this whole conversation. Right. So yes, we will continue. And again, that will parallel the work on the portrait of the graduate, which is continuing and which will be coming to a culmination. So while we've been working with a representative group of volunteers, 80 some that were originally invited, when that draft is complete, we will want to bring that back out to the faculty, to the Board of Education, to the community, before that becomes a finalized document. So these two pieces, yes, we'll continue to develop, and we will continue to communicate about both of them through the end of this school year. And I think both should be ready to go before we open the doors next year. I'll reiterate, the course is always going to be developing, just as they all are, right? So even, once we have a final description of something, doesn't mean we stop tinkering with it. We keep working on everything as it moves forward.
Any? Do we need to formally adjourn as a committee?
Yep. So usually a motion and a vote to adjourn.
Need a motion to adjourn, please? Second?
Second.
Another second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are now adjourned.
Thank you all for doing this. We know this was an extra evening out for all of you, not a regular scheduled meeting, and particularly thank you to Joel and to Tammy and to Julia. We really appreciate this
Nicely done.
conversation tonight.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.